Well, if you're a child of the '80s, then you probably know about the film The Exorcist. And that film is based off of this book, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. And I'm actually not as much of a horror buff as I used to be. I used to go down the aisles at the video rental store and I went from A to Z and just watched everything. And I think The Exorcist must have been in there because I had seen it once when I was a kid, but really don't remember it very much. But one of the projects I'm working on right now sort of has to do with exorcism. And so I wanted to do my research and I thought I would just read the original material. My first impression of this book is one of the greatest stories I've ever read. I just loved every page of this. It's about a woman named Chris Miss Mc. I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up her name. Woman's name is Chris. She's an actress. She's trying to become a director. She lives in Washington, D.C. And her daughter, Reagan or Regan, not quite sure how it's pronounced, comes down with some kind of inexplicable issue, some kind of psychological issue. She has an imaginary friend and named Mr. Howdy or Captain Howdy. And her daughter starts exhibiting these strange symptoms. And at first she goes to all these different doctors and tries to just kind of get rid of the issue, right? Because she's trying to make a career for herself. She's a single woman, single mother, and she's trying to come up in Hollywood. And what the doctors can't figure out what's going on with her daughter. And eventually she calls in a Catholic exorcist who determines that this is in fact a case of spirit possession. And I won't spoil the ending for you, but in general, though, the story is riveting. It plays so well. It's written so well. It's just it's fantastic. And it's genuinely scary at times. I mean, the way that the daughter starts manifesting symptoms, at first, it just comes in these very subtle ways that you wouldn't really think is much of an issue. And then these things start building, and she starts saying very strange things. She starts acting in these weird ways. She sometimes is confused herself, and and then in the end, she's doing and saying insane things, and it's an amazing buildup. So I think one of the my favorite things about the book is just how it's written. It's pretty seamless in terms of the protagonist will go into a flashback, and there'll be italics to have these past conversations with doctors. There's also there's a fair amount of medical, I don't know, not jargon, but there's enough medical knowledge within this to kind of like give it a little bit of legitimacy, it feels like, and where the protagonist is constantly she's exhausting her options with the sciences, and she just can't find any answers. And it's really written so that you get the impression that the sciences are not up to snuff. And so I think one of the reasons I'm interested in this is because I read this book. It was Edward Claude's The Question: If a man dies, shall he live again? And Edward Claude, he's kind of an anthropologist slash literary critic, I guess, from the late 1800s. And his writing style is very wry. He's very funny. He's very satirical. And at the time when he wrote this, there was a big movement, big wave of spirit mediums in Victorian England and also in America on the East Coast. And one of the women he investigates is Leonora Piper, who was this famous medium. And there were other people in his kind of circle of skeptics at the time who really didn't believe that these people were actually talking to the dead. They were clearly doing something within some kind of somnambulistic state, right? A somnambulistic state being when you're sort of not really conscious, but you're able to answer questions. It seems as though there's another voice speaking through the medium, and he's trying to understand who the mediums are who are complete fraudsters, and he uncovers quite a few of them. And Houdini was another one who sort of made his bones uncovering these frauds. But then there were others like Leonora Piper who really just seemed to be in this true somnambulistic state. And Amy Tanner, who I think would make one of the greatest modern heroines of a film, she wrote this book, Studies in Spiritism, and she also went and investigated Leonora Piper. And the thing about Piper is that she was completely willing to let anybody investigate her. There weren't really any tricks being done, as far as I know. I haven't finished this book yet, but so there were a lot of people who were investigating this woman, and one of the reasons people were investigating her, and I've spoken about this book a lot, is because she she claimed that this young man, Dean Bridgman Connor, this is from the book, The Quest for Dean Bridgman Connor. She claimed that Dean Bridgman Connor, who was a 20-something-year-old lighting technician, I think, who was working in a theater in Mexico in the late, what was it, 1890 or so, he got sick and died, and she claimed that he was still alive and that he was being held hostage in some asylum somewhere or in some building in Mexico. And this is a true story. And so there was this entire search and rescue effort by by Connor's family, who sent various people out there, and they're trying to talk to Leonora Piper over Telegram, trying to figure out like what is she seeing in her visions. These things check out, but these don't. Finally, Anthony Philpotts, when he wrote this book, he got a little bit of money from his news company. I believe it was the Boston Telegraph, and he went and investigated it and wrote this book and found. But basically, Leonora Piper doesn't talk to the dead. He claims that she was able to communicate, able to read people's minds, which makes this book like doubly fascinating. Anyway, it kind of gives you an idea of this kind of like state of psychiatry and New Age mysticism that was going on in the late 19th and early 20th century, and it's a really fascinating time. And so exorcism was kind of a natural sort of interest for a lot of psychiatrists. And this book, Possession and Exorcism, was written by Trage Osterreich. And this was some of the main source material for Blatty's book. Osterreich wrote this, I believe, in the 30s. And let's see, it says here it was originally published. I don't know. I can't remember when it was originally published. At any rate, 1921. So over 100 years ago. So Osterreich goes through the whole sort of history of possession, exorcism, and kind of takes this very, I would say, a fairly nuanced stance on it, which is that by and large, possession isn't really the issue for a lot of these kind of psychological issues. For the most part, it's probably some kind of, he calls it hysteria, obsession, various other kind of psychological issues. I haven't finished reading this one yet. It's pretty interesting. It's really dense. So it's difficult to kind of read these things. But at the time, psychiatry was kind of grappling with these issues and trying to understand, well, what is actually happening under the surface. And you kind of had these various schools of thought. On the one hand, you had the kind of Franco-Anglo-Saxon psychiatrists who just believed that there was no possession. There's no such thing. In fact, it's just an issue of what they would call some kind of dysfunctional psychiatric state. And so you get this entire army of psychiatrists and psychologists and the pharmaceutical industry and all this that just sort of try and cure what is traditionally called possession. Now, on the other side, you have the ardent spiritists, you could say, who say that all mental disorder is spiritual. All mental disorder is possession. And Catholics are somewhere in the middle of that. At least before Vatican II, and still after Vatican II, Catholics still have exorcism. There is still an exorcism group. It's just not quite as common anymore. It's been written about. I bring this book up sometimes. It's not a good book. It's Gallagher's book. At any rate, they still use the Roman ritual. Sometimes they do it in English. Sometimes they do it in Latin. They claim that Latin is better sometimes. They're, however you want to take that. And so ancient society saw ancient society saw all sickness and all disorder and even death as spiritual ailment. Keep in mind, in ancient society, there's no such thing as a natural death. That doesn't exist. People are supposed to live forever, according to, ancient thinking. Ancient thinking can't even comprehend the idea of people dying unless a witch kills them, or a sorcerer, or some kind of evil spirit, or they get possessed, or whatever it might be. Even falling into a volcano or stepping on a rusty nail is due to a demon or witchcraft. And so that's sort of the two sides. And the sciences did a hard pivot all the way to the other side and basically said that possession is not real anymore. And there's probably some truth to that. It's possible that a lot of hysteria and a lot of obsession and all this is much much less about possession. It's not necessarily somnambulistic, right? But there might be like simpler psychological issues going on. There is one really interesting author, and I'm going to plug him. I wish he would email me. Jean-Michel Ugolion, Puppet of Desire, is one of my favorite books, psychology books. He kind of breaks down the psychiatry of possession and exorcism and hysteria, and he does it in this very mechanical way that's incredibly compelling. I almost don't want to spoil it for you, except you can't freaking find this book. It's impossible to find. It's super expensive. I found it for cheap by chance. But anyway, Puppet of Desire does a really good job of sort of like finding a really interesting scientific explanation for this. Now, what do I think? I think that by and large, if you care about my opinion about possession, my opinion is that the idea that possession can only be done by the devil or by demons, or as if demons are these things kind of floating around, I think is just too simple. I think that that's a very sort of inaccurate way of describing a psychological illness. But I don't think that possession is fake. I think that possession is a real thing. It seems as though people fall into these somnambulistic, obsessive states and actually forget what they do in those states. Or in fact, they'll actually reverse memories. I say if somebody is obsessed about a celebrity or someone who's very close to them, for example, and that person, let's say they buy a new car, right? And so the person who's obsessed goes and buys that same car. And the person who bought the car is like, wow, why'd you get the same car as me? And the person who's obsessed might think that, like, I thought of it first. It was my idea first. You're the one who copied me. So there is this sort of memory inversion in obsession and in possession, it seems. It seems to be shared across these different psychological issues. Anyway, again, Puppet of Desire, they're very good. Very, very good explanation of some of that stuff. So, Exorcist, great book. Really enjoyed it. That's all I have to say.